has become a passion. I was a very late learner. I didn't pick up an instrument until I was at university, actually. I loved the music. I really got through to probably my early 20s without playing an instrument at all. From the age of 16 or 17, I actually loved jazz music. I hung out with the jazz crowd at university. They became my best friends, still many are. Then it was just intolerable that there was this language, and I was a linguist at university. It was intolerable that there's this language, but I cannot speak it. Show several times, which you can do with the dumb waiter because it's only 40 minutes.
It's only 40 minutes? Yes. I've never read it.
I think schools again have a responsibility here to encourage people to look at issues through multiple lenses and have the flexibility and open-mindedness to acknowledge that there may be multiple ways of being right or having an opinion.
I'm very, very pleased to have my headmaster from my boarding school in Aiglon College, Mr. Richard McDonald, here with us at the Piano Man in Delhi, India. Very grateful that we have been able to remain in touch over the last 20 or so odd years. It makes me very very happy. Well, and thank you for being here.
It's almost 30 years.
It's almost 30 years?
I know you're trying to downplay your age
Yeah,
and probably mine, but it is almost 30 years. But in a way, time doesn't matter. And I think for me, the beauty of the relationship I like to maintain with former students is at the end of the day, education never stops. And even though you may have left school, the journey of learning continues, and the journey as an educator, the journey of mentorship and support, and just curiosity and care, that doesn't evaporate the day a student leaves from the school. So I'm always happy and honoured to maintain contacts with people, particularly when they've pursued interesting and creative careers.
Welcome. So Richard, where were you born?
So I was born in the UK in an unremarkable medium-sized town called Guildford in Surrey, in the southeast of England.
Siblings?
I have one sister, an older sister.
Wish.
She's living in the US now, and my view is always that having an older sister brings out the impish in our personalities, because I became an early practitioner of teasing my elder sister, and because she had a slightly short temper, that made it all a bit more fun.
I'm sure. I wouldn't know. I'm an only child. Father, mother?
Yes. So in some senses, we were a very conventional family. So mother, father, sister, boy, girl. My father was initially a teacher, and then he transitioned careers mid-career. He became ordained and became a minister in the Church of England. but always kept his connection with schools. So that was a theme throughout my childhood. My mother was a homemaker. She did occasional jobs helping out in schools, in particular as a matron in boarding schools, but had no real professional aspirations to go beyond making a lovely home. So I felt very privileged to have that stable unit.
You're always involved in some through your father and mother in the educational system.
Yes, in fact, I tell people I was born in a boarding school because actually I was born in a hospital, but I went back the next day to my parents' home, which was in a boarding school, and my father worked throughout his teaching career in boarding schools. And then I myself went to a boarding school, and then I went to university, which kind of was an extension of that. And then I started working in boarding schools, and that was my life.
That was your life.
And apart from one brief, spectacular interlude in the year 2000, I was always living in a boarding school environment. So I think I always had a curiosity about the world of knowledge. I was a pretty studious student at school. I enjoyed learning. It came fairly naturally in most subjects, not in maths and physics, but certainly in most other subjects. And so I was very much in my comfort zone in an environment where learning and knowledge were buzzing around. And so they were always a priority in my life. But I try and step away from this notion of seeing myself as an academic because I think it can make us feel rather two-dimensional, as though our role is simply to know a lot of stuff and then teach a lot of stuff, which is not the way I see myself or my relationship with knowledge.
It has never defined you, has it? You have an ease of extracting the most from time. Is it down to having a structure, maybe a roadmap, applying discipline, sticking with it? Music, for example?
I think I have to give a very ambivalent answer to that because I'm a great believer in the value of having purpose, direction, plans. I think Churchill was ascribed to the statement that planning is essential and plans are useless. And that has been a little bit my experience. Is it's important to have a vision of what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it, to give yourself a roadmap. But actually, when you're on the road, your key core skills are going to be as much about adaptation, improvisation, hence the link possibly to music, that we must constantly redesign our pathway at every step as we step along it. So structure, yes, but flexibility to remodel the structure at all points.
Richard, do you believe that the difference between individuals is the result of education and upbringing?
Really is the classic nature-nurture debate, isn't it? Which nobody's really totally got a handle on. I think there's always going to be a balance between what we're born with genetically, the environment in which we grow up, both human and physical, and at what point our experiences flip the switches that turn on our development in certain areas. And I do sometimes think of young people who go to schools as being primed with lots of switches that can be left switched off or switched on. And part of the challenge as an educator is to get the student to have the agency to play with their own switches and experiment with who they're becoming.
Take me through your journey for now till you became the headmaster of Aiglon College, boarding school, which in Switzerland we talked about. At that time you were fairly young, and how did that happen? And at that time, did you think I've made it?
Well, if I kind of back model it, I think I was very happy in boarding school, and I was so certain that I was going to become a teacher because it just seemed a great lifestyle that appealed to many sides and it seemed to allow the teachers to foster many of their different passions. And I thought that's great for me. And I was so certain that I was going to become a teacher that I had a niggling suspicion that perhaps I wouldn't, and that life would surprise me. Life has surprised me in many ways, but it didn't surprise me in that. And so, in fact, I finished my A-levels in a very interesting school, which was, it was a very prestigious boarding school, but its distinguishing factor was that the children who went there came from families with very limited means and either social or financial shortfall. So I was actually with quite an edgy crew of students who'd come from difficult backgrounds. And
What were the challenges you faced with this?
I think meeting and living alongside any humans has its own set of challenges. But what I found particularly enriching was that I came with no assumptions about people saying, "Oh, they're from a wealthy background, everything will be fine," or "They're from a terrible background, everything will be terrible," or whatever it might be. You learn to peel away that assumption that people from a particular background are going to be a particular way. So it was a melting pot of people, and I learned early that the people who really impressed me had come through hardships and they'd toughed it out, and by dint of commitment had really been able to build something quite exceptional.
Coming in, was there any kind of prejudice
to that particular school? I wouldn't say so. I do remember an extraordinary occasion standing on the touchline of a rugby match between this school and a posh school with some students who came from very wealthy backgrounds. And there was a mother there cheering for the opposite team, saying, "Come on, lads, smash the paupers."
Really?
Yeah, which I just, for me, was one of those echoing phrases I will never forget. And I guess you shouldn't take things like that too seriously on the edge of a rugby match. And the result of that clarion call to smash the paupers was that there were a lot of bloody noses, but they weren't the paupers.
But more importantly, and more even scarier, is the fact that a mother was saying that. So imagine the upbringing that child had at home. That bias, right?
And I think part of the role, again, particularly in boarding schools, is when children come in, is sometimes you need to unpick some assumptions that they may have brought with them, and to do it with sensitivity, but also to recognize that you do not necessarily want children automatically to assume the values of their parents.
Exactly.
But at the same time, you don't want to tell the parents, "We're going to take your child
And it could balance.
and change them into something that's unrecognizable from you."
Yes, exactly. But look, when you came to Aiglon, I mean, like a change of management in sports, right? In a sports club, was it difficult for Richard, for you to stamp every time your own unique brand of vision for that specific establishment? Aiglon, for example, where you met with diffidence from the administration, the student body.
I think you have to assume when you go into any new situation, there's going to be a normal distribution curve of a handful of people who are evangelically supporting you, a handful of people who are ultimate terrorists and are out to do everything they can to make it hard. But the bulk of the curve is in the middle. And the challenge really with management is not to turn all the negative people into evangelists, but to move everybody one step towards, so the critical mass moves in a way that you can actually get stuff done. And I think the challenges I faced, I came into a school that was in pretty good shape. It had had the same head for 18 years, so there'd been a lot of stability. But paradoxically, I think the expectation was now, after stability, we now need acceleration. It was the time when technology was bursting on the scene. I arrived in the school,
94.
Yes, in 1994, that had it had 2 standalone computers and 1 member of staff who knew how to operate them, and he was an English teacher.
Yeah.
So it was vestigial, and it was a case of building it up from pretty much ground zero, and accelerating towards the digital technologies that quickly defined much of life.
Immediately coming to Aiglon as headmaster, what were your initial challenges?
I think there's always the challenge of coming up with a vision that is fresh and compelling, but is a natural continuation of the essence of the institution. So learning about the institution, it's really important to stop and listen and learn before just coming in and saying, I know what's right and I'm going to do this, that and the other. So finding the pace, establishing the pace of sufficient watching and learning, but also creating momentum, because ultimately people are excited. They're frightened by change, but they're excited by momentum. And trying to find that sweet spot. The key really is about building relationships, whether it's with the students or with the adults, making people feel they're confident that you care and that you're doing it with an understanding of the beating heart of the institution.
You managed to do that very well. Yes,
Thank you. Thank you. You don't know when it's happening. You're trying and you don't know.
What are the merits of an elite school like Aiglon? Do they fail to make deep impact on scale, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've used a difficult word there, which is elite. I kind of object to that word because, again, it's loaded with connotations, which for a few means fantastic and for a lot of people means exclusive and inaccessible. And the issue for a school like that is that the so-called elitism was linked to the fact that it had a very high cost. So to access a high cost school implied that you already came from a very wealthy family. And so actually one of the challenges I set myself from the start was how do we build pathways for access to students who come from very modest backgrounds, so we can create some socio-economic balance in the student body, which will be good for those individuals. It'll also be good for everybody else to live in a more...
How does one create that balance?
I think you need to promote diversity and promote diversity of mindset, and also defend students against the idea that they are somehow elite by the very fact that they've been put in there by their parents, whether they wanted to go or not. They've been thrust into something that's now labelled as elite. And to be fair, at the time I arrived, I'd come from quite prestigious British boarding schools, which certainly outgunned Aiglon in terms of physical facilities, probably depth of experience in the teaching staff. I mean, don't get me wrong, Aiglon had some fantastic, very devoted and characterful people, but in a sense, the only things that really made it elite were the high cost.
High cost, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you joined Aiglon in 94, as we mentioned. By this time you had a family, right?
Yes.
And you have this opportunity to utilize your skills, managerial skills, and at the highest level, right, to deal with a culturally diverse set of students, boarders. Did you jump at the opportunity? Did your family jump at it? Was there any hesitation? Did you have an audition before a panel? How did it happen? I mean, the idea of moving, was it easy?
Yes. So I think from quite an early stage in my teaching career, I had always been looking around the school to say, what other jobs could I do in this school? And from quite an early stage, I was very keen to get into residential pastoral care as a housemaster, for example. That really excited me and was definitely compatible with family life and so on. And because I believe greatly in the power of role modeling and building strong interpersonal relationships, which I think are often more transformational than highly instructional teaching. So I aspired to that. So when I got an opportunity at quite a young age to move to another school to run a boarding house, I jumped at that. And then I guess I'm continuing to look around and say, who are the people that impress me in this school? We had a wonderful head of school, and I remember thinking, I wonder if I could do that job. I wonder if I could do that job. And I wonder if I would want to do it. And I would wonder if I could add value by doing a job like that. So I kind of went to school a little bit on the things he did and how he did them. It was almost like ghost mentoring.
Yeah.
And I had a a slightly naive dream in my kind of early 20s. I'd spent a year out of university working in a grammar school in Austria in the mountains. And I had this long-term dream that one day I would start my own school in the Alps. Why the Alps? Because I believe strongly in the value of being close to nature when learning. I also believed in the importance of being in intercultural settings. I suffered quite badly as an asthmatic when I was in the mountains. Suddenly I could breathe, quality of life changed. So I had this dream that I would one day, I'd love to start my own school in the Alps. And then I saw an advert for a school that already existed that in almost every respect seemed to stand for all the things that I wanted to achieve. And I was a bit cross. I thought, but that's the school I'm going to found. But it already had been set up in 1949. So I was way too young to apply. They even put an age range from 35 to 45, and I was 32 at the time I applied. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. So I applied, was very astonished to be longlisted, even more astonished to be shortlisted. And I can still remember the day in my final interview, which was a 3-day period, having to sign a letter fundamentally to say, if I'm offered the job, I will accept it. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized this isn't a role play. This is not a piece of theatre. This is a reality. If I write this and they want me, I'm doing this job. And then I did have a sort of 15 seconds of thinking, imposter syndrome.
Right.
But I did it anyway. I was in too deep by that stage. And then I was offered the job, as I mentioned earlier, about a year before I took up office. And that was exciting.
Family was
And
on board.
family was totally on board.
Totally on board.
Totally on board and up for the experience and up for the adventure. You know what? I think over the years of running a school, and I was at Aiglon 18 years in total, I had to deal with many tricky situations, many of them quite personal, quite intimate, things I probably wouldn't talk about necessarily in an interview. But the things people think are hard, like, having to do something, having to punish a student for doing something wrong. After a while, you need to keep your humanity, but I think you have a clear idea of where the lines lie. Where things could become really difficult was if you had very nuanced situations with kids who had maybe families that were in a bit of a mess, and they didn't really know where home was, or they needed guidance on setting their radar and setting their chart through the waters. So there were many conversations of that kind. Generally speaking, dealing with young people is much easier than dealing with adults. So you sometimes have some quite difficult conversations with adults and colleagues, but equally brilliant and inspiring conversations with both students and adults.
Wonderful. Richard, we can both agree that education is a potential remedy for a gap in social inequalities, right? That it's vital for social mobility, upward social mobility. But what happens when some educational systems benefit more than others? Does that breed injustice, in your opinion?
Yes, I think potentially it does. I do believe you can provide great and transformational education at every layer of society. And we sometimes make assumptions that if you have a lot of resources and you have a lot of teachers, it's automatically going to be better. And if you have maybe fewer resources and access to fewer teachers with experience, it's definitely going to be worse. And I think what we sometimes underestimate, or we overestimate, sometimes the importance of incredibly rigorous academic content. Definitely important, definitely has its place. But we undervalue some of the developmental strategies that are possible at every level to promote confidence, a sense of love and belonging, a sense of constructive ambition, a sense of awareness of one's own potential, the importance of kindness. Many of these things can be achieved by establishing a school at whatever socio-economic level that has a clear set of values that are shared, and where people can align behind something that's inspiring. So I do take the point that people who have access to highly funded education may seem to have preferential access, but I'm not sure they're necessarily happier or better equipped. And I think this has become very much a topic of the stage I'm at my life now, is how to ensure that people at every socio-economic level have access to positive and transformational learning experiences that may well be outside classrooms.
Yeah.
I would say you have a spectrum of motives from families, from students and so on. If you ask young people what their number one priority is in school, overwhelmingly they will say, my friends. And if they say my exam results or my results are the most important thing in my school, that's the result of indoctrination. That is not a natural state of affairs. So I think young people start with a social thirst and a need to be included and have a sense of belonging. And I think sometimes schools squeeze that out of people. And in that respect, I think they're doing a disservice to young people. Hence my view that many schools have become obsessed with exam results and university destinations.
Yeah.
It is essential that we have highly skilled people with high levels of competence in areas that are essential for the ongoing health and well-being of human societies and actually all living things, because to some extent we're stewards of a living world, and we need to have good science. We need to understand science, and it needs to be we need that rigor at the top. But the arms race to get the best exam results so that you get to certain institutions or certain schools can boast that they have the best results is doing a grave disservice to the humanity of people in those schools, where things are suddenly out of balance. The notion that a healthy education balances mind, body and spirit. If you're in an environment where everything is focused on exam results, we might expand the mind, but we may diminish the spirit and give little opportunity for our physical beings to express themselves.
I remember you playing on the stage at Aiglon, our headmaster, playing. Throughout your career, how did you manage to balance both?
If I'm honest, it was hard to commit as much time as I would like to my creative endeavors, and music has become a passion. I was a very late learner. I didn't pick up an instrument until I was at university, actually. I loved the music beforehand, and I'd had many opportunities, but I'd witnessed my sister being forced to have piano lessons as a child, and it was excruciating for her and for anybody listening. And I said rather precociously to my parents, never make me do that. If I'm going to find music, I'll find it my way in my time. And regrettably, they listened. And so I really got through to probably my early 20s without playing an instrument at all. And I only started playing because from the age of 16 or 17, I actually loved jazz music. I hung out with the jazz crowd at university. They became my best friends, still many are. And then it was just intolerable that there was this language, and I was a linguist at university. It was intolerable that there's this language, but I cannot speak it.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear it, but I cannot speak it. And I make that parallel between language and music all the time, because many of the parts of our mind and body that are activated when we play music are the same parts that we activate when we speak or communicate. There was an interesting study recently that also said that when they put lots of electrodes on the heads of musicians to see what's going on in their brain when they're playing. There are very, very close correlations between the language centres and the music production centres. But when a musician starts to improvise, the whole wiring changes. That different centres in the brain light up. And much in the same way that we're having this interview, it's not scripted. I don't know what we're going to be talking about in 3, 4, 5 minutes. I don't know what words will come out of my mouth. But we learn to have the confidence that when we're challenged with a thought, we have the language to respond. And I think music is the same. I think music is a language. And if Rollins says they're trying to shut us down, that he was probably talking about the improvised voice.
Improvised voice, I see.
So there is still something unbelievably magical about a beautifully executed Mozart concerto. And I have huge respect for people who can do that. I couldn't do that with the level of precision. But I'm often struck by the number of very accomplished classical musicians who, if you impel them into the improvisational space, they're lost. They say, well, where are the... give me the notes and I'll play. And I think the parallel is a little bit like the difference between reading a story and telling a story. So if you say, Richard, will you read me a story? And I take a book and I read the story. I might read it beautifully. I might read it with sensitivity and manage to extract the meaning of the text. But if you say, Richard, tell me a story, I have to reach into a different part of my wiring to say, I have to conjure up the magic of experience and language and piece them together so that I've got something to say.
On your recent visits to India, to Delhi, today, what are you trying to achieve here? I mean, what may have changed in your understanding about the education that once was and is now? And how can schools of tomorrow learn and evolve from schools of today, or in an Indian context as well?
I think there are many things bundled into that, and the tensions lie between what does this nation have as a vision of its own future as a nation, and how does that fit in with a vision of the world as a whole, of which India by population and scale is a very significant part. So what is that vision for the world of tomorrow? My sense is that with the communications that we have developed over the last 150 years, it's naive to think that you can only see things through a nationalist viewpoint, that the interconnectedness between cultures and nations is the only way that we can create positive loops that are peaceful and lead to, I think, constructive outcomes for humanity and for all living things on this planet. I am nervous, therefore, about tendencies towards segmenting the world and trying to be the best. I think the key is to be very, 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 very good and help others to be very, 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 very good. So I think that's the first premise, is that schools of tomorrow and young people of tomorrow need to be connected and have an understanding of an intercultural global view. Doesn't mean to say they can't be very focused and anchored in where they live, but they need to see that in a wider context.
Are underprivileged children falling behind? Are measures being taken to rectify this in schools?
Yeah, it's a difficult word, underprivileged, isn't it? We need to be clear what we mean by underprivileged. If you mean people who come from very modest backgrounds, are they falling behind? I think they are moving forward, but other people are moving forward at a different speed and possibly in a different direction. So we get this impression of a disparity.
Yeah.
So literacy levels are generally going up. People's ability to connect with the world are going up. But perversely, one of the flip sides of this very easy communication we have in the world today is that it's acting a bit like a drug. on young people and on learners. There's an enormous amount of commentary, a lot of noise as well around this notion of is our digital dependence making us stupid or miserable or depressed? Is it having a toll on our mental health? And I don't have the answer to that, although I think there are some connections. I think responsible use of technology is great. I think addictive behaviours can be very destructive. So I think in managing schools of the future, ensuring that technology does not become a reason to say this person is falling behind or this person is falling ahead.
So you're saying that the reliance on technology is widening inequalities in certain aspects?
Well, potentially it's widening them. In other areas, it may be narrowing them. So it may be that there's never been more opportunities for remote communities who don't have access to teaching and information to have access to that through technology. And people talk about, what's AI going to do for learning in the future? And AI right now is still a tool. It's a bit like saying to a carpenter, would a hammer help you do your job? And the answer is yes. Can you do damage with a hammer? Yes. So we need to think about how we use the hammer, how we keep ourselves safe, how we keep other people safe. I don't think that will always be the case. I do think there may come an inflection point where we have much less control over what is happening than perhaps we do right now. And there is a lot of anxiety being generated at the moment around frameworks to ensure that AI doesn't take over whatever that might mean. It's a reality and it's there, and we should harness it and work with it and live with it. But I think the other incredible source of intelligence that is not artificial, that we're forgetting to tap into, is nature. And I think what I'm seeing increasingly is a bigger and bigger divide, not just between what you've called underprivileged people, children coming from very modest backgrounds, to people who are being underprivileged because they have no access to nature. And I think that can be a crippling influence, and it creeps up on you. You may not notice it. So I would love to see ways in which in the schools of the future, there is a much greater connectivity to the wisdom and mysteries of nature and the miraculous way in which things work. That is, for me, the counterpoint to artificial intelligence.
Very interesting. Are there any steps being taken to reduce the impact, the harmful effects of COVID-19? Mental health issues are at the forefront today. Do you feel the education system globally and in India is truly doing what it can to nurture and include after COVID-19, after the harmful effects of that on the academic institutions?
I think it's almost still too early to come to clear conclusions about the impact of COVID-19, which had obviously a huge social impact at multiple levels, created its own divisions, created its own sense of those who perhaps were more vulnerable than others. A lot of debate over whether the world overreacted. And again, I don't think I'm going to express an opinion particularly on that, but I think the shock waves, rather like an earthquake or a tsunami, were felt more acutely in some places than others. But recurrent theme to me was that children who were not at school wanted to be at school, and they were aching to get back. And it loops back to my comment about friendships and your social place. Schools are they are social communities.
And in today's world of political turmoil, easy accessibility to media, How do we manage our youth perceive these conflicts? Who do you think must be made responsible to give children a perspective that will be understood with greater levels of empathy in maybe generations to come?
Yeah, it is tricky, and I certainly agree. We're living through unprecedented global polarities and tensions. I think, as far as the media, we all look at the world either through our immediately lived experience. I can have an immediate experience of life in Delhi today because I'm here. And there are billions of other people who can have an opinion about Delhi, but they're not here. They may be right, they may be wrong, but they are seeing Delhi through a lens. And it may be the lens of a media with an agenda or without an agenda or an unconscious bias. Very hard to look at something from the outside without there being some tint in the glass or some distortion in the glass. But we choose the windows we look through. I think schools, again, have a responsibility here to encourage people to look at issues through multiple lenses and have the flexibility and open-mindedness to acknowledge that there may be multiple ways of being right or having an opinion. And that tolerance for the view of the other is collapsing in this current polarity. And I'm not suggesting there's one end of the spectrum's better than the other. I think I joke sometimes that what we need is an extreme centre party. We've got an extreme over here and an extreme here. Nobody's really championing as a loud warrior for compromise.
I like to end with the Proust questionnaire. You ready? Your main failing.
I'm great at starting things, but then I start lots of things, and I sometimes find myself, I'm flying all these planes, how am I going to land them all? So yes, sometimes I send up too many aeroplanes without a plan to land them all.
Your idea of happiness, Richard.
I think happiness has to include that which lies outside us. The notion that happiness is all about me feeling good, it's incomplete without the notion that that feeling is expressed through other things. And again, you've heard me talk about my connection with nature. I think nature's miraculous and beautiful. And so anything that is totally inward and excludes the natural world around me cannot be true happiness. We have to include the other and all that lies around us.
Your favorite heroes in fiction?
If I can perhaps pervert the use of the word hero,
You can.
I think one of my favorite stories with a distinctive character in it is a short story by Herman Melville called Bartleby the Scrivener, who is a thoroughly unremarkable person working in New York in the end of the 19th century. And one day he's given a task. He's a totally unremarkable guy. He's basically an office clerk. And he's given a task by one of the lawyers who says, we need you to do this. And he says, I should prefer not to. And creates absolute consternation and lots of noise. But he holds his ground and they leave him alone. And a little bit later, they give him another task. And he says, I should prefer not to. So there's this notion of the quiet resistance, whether it's motivated by personal interest or a matter of principle. That character has always marked me. Although sadly he comes to a sticky end. It's all a bit sad.
I love that phrase, quiet resilience. It's quite poetic. Do you feel closer to nature playing the saxophone?
music is a mystery. What the hell is going on? Why do people listen to it? Why is it such an important thing? Why does it cross cultures? Why do these sounds? Does it happen in nature, in other species? Do they have their own music? Why do we get so excited? Why can you fill a theatre hall with thousands of people to listen to a piano concerto or a sitar concert? What's going on? And it's vibrations. All sounds are vibration. Everything really is ultimately is a vibration. And an Indian traditional mysticism has been locked into that really since its earliest beginnings, this notion that all things are breath, all things are vibration. So arguably you could say the saxophone is an act of mastery of our breath, and that it's the triggering of resonances that may in different ways impact our emotional state.
Thank you, Richard.
It's been a great pleasure chatting, and thank you for allowing me to explore myself through improvising linguistically.
You're most welcome.
Right. See you upstairs.